I forgot my passport, but when I heard my husband upstairs in our mansion that morning, I froze. He wasn't supposed to be home, and the voice I heard with him wasn't mine. My name is Lena Marlowe, I'm 34, and this is what happened on the day my marriage broke apart. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel. That morning, I was leaving for a medical conference. I had packed everything, and was already halfway down the driveway when I realized my passport was missing. I ran back into the house, annoyed at myself for forgetting it. But the moment I stepped inside, I heard laughter coming from the guest suite upstairs. My husband, Cormac, was laughing softly with a woman. My stomach twisted. He wasn't supposed to be home until the next day. I knew instantly something was wrong. I didn't go up. I backed out of the house as quietly as I could and drove straight to my cousin Faye's place. She didn't ask many questions. She just made coffee and let me speak. The more I talked, the more everything began to make sense. His late nights, the sudden trips, the cold behavior he tried to hide. Faye pushed me to look deeper, so we checked our financial records. What we found shocked me even more. Hotel charges, strange withdrawals, and payments to a woman named Rilla Dane. Still shaking, I hired a private investigator. A week later, he confirmed everything. Cormac had been seeing Rilla for 9 months. He had even rented an apartment under a fake company name. Worst of all, he told her he would divorce me after he secured a big contract that required him to appear stable and married. I wasn't a partner to him. I was a tool. My lawyer, Greer Holliday, helped me gather proof and secure my own assets before confronting him. I acted calm at home, pretending everything was normal. I had to keep him unaware until the right moment. That moment came 2 weeks later. I asked him to meet me in the great room. When he walked in, I laid everything on the table: pictures, receipts, recordings. His face went pale. Rilla showed up during the argument, thinking he had already told me. The two of them began fighting with each other, revealing even more lies. I didn't raise my voice once. The divorce that followed was not kind to him. With all the evidence, I was awarded the mansion and most of our shared assets. His company found out about his behavior, and his contract fell through. Rilla left him soon after. Months later, I'm rebuilding my life in the same house that once held so many lies. And now, when I think about that forgotten passport, I realize it didn't ruin my trip. It saved me. I grew up in a quiet, upper-middle-class neighborhood just outside Asheville, North Carolina, where everything looked peaceful from the outside. My life followed the same pattern for years: steady, calm, predictable. That's the world I was living in when I first met Cormac, long before I ever imagined the cracks that would form later. We met at a small community design event. He was an ambitious architect with a confident smile and an easy way of talking that drew people in. He listened closely, remembered little details, and carried himself like someone who genuinely cared. In the beginning, he was warm, attentive, and thoughtful enough to make me feel chosen. It felt natural to fall into step with him. There were early signs I should have paid more attention to. He could be dismissive in subtle ways, brushing off my concerns as overreactions or misunderstanding. But I had been raised to stay patient, to give people room, to be understanding, even when something quietly bothered me. I told myself he was under pressure, that I shouldn't make small issues into big ones. His work had him traveling often. At first, I didn't mind. I believed he needed the space to grow his career and bring his ideas to life. He'd talk about new projects in different states, long meetings, and tight deadlines. I assumed those trips were nothing more than what he said they were. I had no reason to doubt him. Trusting him felt easy back then. But things began to shift in ways I didn't quite recognize until much later. His trips grew longer, his schedule more unpredictable. He came home tired, distracted, with explanations that felt thinner every time. When I asked if something was weighing on him, he always blamed stress, saying the industry was changing or clients were pushing too hard. His reassurances were brief, lacking the warmth they once carried. Even at home, he seemed lost in his own world. He'd sit at the table with his mind somewhere else, offering short answers and forced smiles. I tried to keep our life steady, to give him space to breathe, but the distance between us spread quietly. Conversations faded, small gestures disappeared, and the man who once made me feel safe now felt unreachable. Looking back, the signs were there, each one a quiet warning. But at the time, I convinced myself things would settle down, that every marriage went through phases. I wanted to believe the best in him, and that hope kept me from seeing the truth hidden beneath his growing coldness. I pushed the front door open, expecting the quiet calm I was used to after a long morning. Instead, a strange sound drifted down from above, soft, playful, and completely out of place in my home. At first, I couldn't process it. I stood still, listening harder, my breath caught halfway in my chest. Then I recognized the first voice. I had heard it across dinner tables, during late-night talks, in moments of comfort and conflict. No matter how faint it was, I knew it belonged to Cormac. But there was another voice with his, light, youthful, almost whispery. It didn't belong to anyone I knew. The tone between them wasn't awkward. It carried a rhythm that hinted at routine, not accident. A cold rush moved through me. My fingers stopped working right, curling in toward my palms as if trying to hold on to something steady. My heartbeat kicked fast, almost painful, like my chest had turned into a drum someone was striking without pause. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt tight, like it had closed around the shock. The sounds upstairs continued, quiet laughter, low comments I couldn't make out but could easily interpret. There was a comfort in the way they spoke to each other, a closeness that stripped away any hope that this was a misunderstanding. Nothing about what I was hearing felt new. It felt rehearsed, familiar, practiced. And that hurt more than the discovery itself. It meant I had been living beside something hidden for far longer than I wanted to imagine. I stayed rooted to the spot for a few seconds, unable to move. My mind raced through 100 questions at once, each one sharper than the last. How many times had this happened? How had I missed the signs? How long had I been walking around unaware, carrying trust for someone who clearly didn't deserve it? A tremor went through my legs, forcing me to shift my weight. The simple movement reminded me where I was, and what I needed to do. I didn't make a sound. I didn't call out. I didn't confront anyone. I simply stepped back, easing the door closed behind me without letting it click. I walked down the steps as though any sudden motion might shatter me completely. My thoughts jump-led together, wild and heavy, pushing everything else out. I could barely remember why I had come back inside in the first place. Whatever I had planned to retrieve no longer mattered. By the time I reached my car, it felt like the world had tilted. My breath came fast and uneven, and all I could do was grip the steering wheel and try to steady myself. I stared at the house from the driveway, knowing that whatever life I had known only moments earlier had just fallen apart in an instant. I drove straight to Faye's house, needing a place where I wouldn't fall apart. She opened the door before I even knocked, taking one look at my face and pulling me inside without asking a single question. Faye had always been solid, direct, steady, the kind of person who didn't waste time on comforting lies. Sitting at her kitchen table felt like stepping into neutral ground, a space where I could breathe without pretending. When I finally told her what I'd heard, she didn't gasp or soften her voice. She just handed me a glass of water and said, "Then we need to look at everything." That was how it began. No drama, no guessing, just action. She pulled out my laptop, opened the financial folders, and told me to start from the most recent months. At first, the numbers looked normal. Then the pattern shifted. Small cash withdrawals I couldn't explain. Charges from hotels I had never visited. Payments listed as consulting fees that didn't match any project I knew about. The amounts weren't huge individually, but together they formed a path that led to a name I didn't recognize, Rilla Dane. I stared at that name for a long moment, feeling something inside me go still. It wasn't a common name, and it showed up more than once. Faye leaned over my shoulder, scanning each line with the same calm focus she used for everything in life. She didn't jump to conclusions, but she didn't hide what she thought either. "This isn't nothing," she said quietly. "He's moving money around for a reason." I wanted to look away, to stop before the picture became any clearer, but Faye kept me steady. She grabbed a notebook and began listing dates, amounts, and locations. Every entry felt like another weight added to my chest, but I kept going. I needed facts, not guesses. I needed to understand what my life had actually been. When we were done, the table was covered in printed statements, highlighted rows, and scribbled notes. The pattern was undeniable. These weren't mistakes or work-related expenses. Someone had been part of his life in ways I had never known. Seeing it laid out in front of me made everything sharper, more real. Faye turned to me, her tone firm. "You need a lawyer." The idea felt heavy. I wasn't ready to talk about ending anything, not yet. Ending something meant accepting it was broken, and my mind wasn't there. I told her I didn't want to start a war. I just wanted answers. "Then get someone who finds answers for a living," she replied. Her suggestion settled into me slowly, like a gear clicking into place. I didn't want revenge. Not then. I wanted truth, clear, solid, unfiltered truth. So I pulled out my phone, stared at the contact list for a moment, and finally made the decision I had been avoiding since the moment I heard those voices. I scheduled a meeting with a private investigator. The private investigator worked quietly and quickly. He didn't share updates along the way, just told me he'd contact me when everything was verified. Waiting for his call felt like sitting on the edge of a cliff, but I needed to know what lay beneath the surface. When he finally asked me to come in, his tone told me enough. I should brace myself. I sat across from him in a small office that smelled faintly of old folders and coffee. He placed a slim file on the desk, not dramatic, not drawn out, just the facts I had asked for. The first page hit hard. 9 months. That was how long Cormac had been involved with Rilla. Not weeks, not a brief lapse. Nearly a year of secrecy, hidden meetings, and planned time together. It explained the shifting behavior, the distance, the excuses about projects in unfamiliar locations. None of it had been random. Then the investigator slid over photographs and paperwork tied to an apartment in the city. It wasn't in Cormac's name. It had been secured through a small company he had created for the sole purpose of keeping his connection to it invisible. The lease, the utilities, even the mailbox were set up to avoid linking back to our home. It was a second life he maintained while I believed he was working late or traveling for clients. The PI didn't stop there. He pulled out printed messages he had legally obtained through monitoring patterns and gathering evidence from public sources tied to the apartment. In those messages, Cormac spoke openly about plans he hadn't dared to mention in our own house. He told Rilla he intended to leave me, but only after he finalized an architectural contract that required him to appear settled, dependable, and married. His image mattered more to him than honesty or loyalty. I read those lines again and again, feeling something inside me go cold. He wasn't staying with me out of love or a desire to fix our relationship. He was staying because I served a purpose. I made him look stable. I made him look grounded. I had become part of his professional presentation, an accessory he could display until he no longer needed it. That realization cut deeper than anything I had imagined. Betrayal was painful on its own, but learning I had been reduced to a role in a carefully crafted picture, something to complete a narrative he needed for success, left me numb. The investigator closed the file gently, giving me time to collect myself. I didn't cry. I didn't speak for several moments. I just sat there, absorbing the truth I had requested. I had walked into that office wanting clarity, and now I had it, every piece laid out in front of me with no room for doubt. He hadn't just broken trust. He had used me, personally, emotionally, and professionally, and done it all while pretending our life was solid. I met with Greer Holiday the day after receiving the investigator's report. She was steady, direct, and not surprised by much, but even she paused when she looked through the documents. After a long moment, she turned a page toward me and pointed at a cluster of transactions I hadn't noticed before. They looked harmless at first glance, but Greer explained they were part of a pattern. Quiet transfers Cormac had been making to pull money away from our shared estate. He'd been setting things up so that when he finally walked out, there would be less left for me to claim. Hearing that settled something inside me. The betrayal wasn't only emotional. It wasn't only personal. He had been planning a clean exit while keeping me in place long enough to serve his goals. Greer's tone stayed calm as she explained what we needed to do. She wanted every piece of evidence organized, financial records, the investigator's findings, and anything else that showed his intentions. We spent hours building a timeline that exposed what he had been doing behind my back. When I left her office, I knew the next part would be the hardest. I had to go home and act like nothing had changed. The moment I walked through the front door, I forced myself to move normally. I answered questions with steady words, kept my face neutral, and didn't let my hands shake. Every interaction was practiced, controlled. He couldn't suspect anything, not yet. While he went about his routines, I began my own work quietly. Documents I needed were scanned and sent to Greer. Statements were printed and tucked away. I recorded conversations when they touched on money or future plans. Every detail mattered now, and every step had to be taken without raising alarms. There was one more action I needed to take, something my father had set up years earlier, long before any of this trouble existed. He had created a protected trust for me, something separate from my marriage and inaccessible to anyone else. I had never thought much about it, but now it became a shield. I transferred funds Cormac didn't know about into it, ensuring I had security no matter what he tried to move around. The trust wasn't a weapon, it was safety, something he couldn't touch or manipulate. Each day felt like walking across thin ice, but I kept going. I stayed patient, kept my tone light, acted as if I still believed the lies he told. Inside, though, everything was shifting. The truth I now held changed the way I looked at every moment in that house. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing. Quietly, carefully, step by step, I readied myself for the moment everything would come to the surface. I chose a Sunday afternoon for the confrontation, a time when the house was usually quiet. The great room felt like the right place, open, steady, and filled with light that left no corner for excuses to hide in. I stood near the long table where I had arranged the documents in a neat line: statements, copies, photos, and the investigator's summary. Everything was ready. When Cormac walked in, he looked relaxed, completely unaware of what waited for him. I asked him to sit. My voice was steady, almost too steady, and that alone seemed to unsettle him. He asked what was going on, and I simply slid the first set of papers toward him. At first, confusion flickered across his face. Then realization. Then panic. He denied everything immediately, almost tripping over his own words. He said the charges were business-related. The apartment was for a client. The messages were taken out of context. When denial cracked, he shifted to explanations: stress, pressure, misunderstandings. When those didn't land, he turned to blame, accusing me of digging, of being unfair, of creating problems that weren't there. I didn't argue. I didn't interrupt. I kept my hands folded, my breathing even, letting each excuse fall flat on its own. In the middle of his frantic explanations, the doorbell rang. Before either of us could react, the door opened and Rilla stepped inside with a confidence that suggested she believed she belonged there. She called out his name casually, expecting him to greet her. The moment she saw me, she stopped. The moment she saw the documents, her expression shifted from surprise to irritation. Not at me, but at him. She thought he had already spoken to me, that everything between us had been resolved, that she was now stepping into the next phase of their plan. The room changed instantly. They began talking over each other, contradictions tumbling out faster than either could keep straight. He tried to calm her. She pushed back. She mentioned things he had kept hidden. He tried to shush her. Their voices clashed, revealing more in minutes than weeks of quiet investigation ever could. I remained still. I didn't raise my voice or demand anything. I let them unravel in front of me, every word tightening the net they had woven around themselves. By the time they realized how much they had exposed, the damage was done. They weren't speaking to me. They were fighting with each other, revealing their lies, their plans, and the depth of what they had built behind my back. I simply watched, calm and silent, letting the truth stand on its own without needing a single word added from me. The divorce process began quickly once the confrontation was behind us. Greer Holiday handled every step with a clear plan, bringing forward the evidence we had collected over weeks. In the courtroom, she laid out each piece with calm precision, building a picture that left little room for doubt. The first set of documents showed the hidden transfers. Money moved out of our shared accounts in small amounts, spaced apart just enough to avoid immediate notice. Greer explained how these shifts were designed to reduce my share of the estate. Then she presented the proof of the relationship with Rilla, supported by dates, statements, and confirmations from the investigator. The judge listened closely, taking notes as Greer outlined how long the connection had been going on. Next came the breakdown of purchases made with shared funds. Travel costs that were labeled as work-related, gifts charged to our accounts, and expenses tied to the apartment he had secured under a false company. Greer detailed how that property had been maintained separately from our home, hidden behind legal layers meant to keep me unaware. Every piece of information pointed to a pattern of secrecy and misuse. Cormac tried to defend himself, but the explanations he gave in the courtroom were weaker than the ones he had tried at home. Each statement clashed with the evidence in front of the judge. When Greer highlighted how he had used the image of our marriage to support a professional deal, the judge's patience thinned. The Ethics Review Board for his industry had already been notified, and shortly after the proceedings began, he lost the contract he had been counting on. The board cited concerns about honesty and conduct, all supported by the documentation Greer had provided. The financial impact hit him hard. Losing that contract meant he no longer had the leverage he had once held. The stability he had claimed in his professional presentations fell apart publicly. In the courtroom, the consequences of his choices became clear. When the final decision was read, it felt like the first solid ground I had stood on in months. The judge awarded me the mansion, acknowledging the imbalance created by his actions. I received the larger share of our remaining assets, ensuring I would not bear the damage alone. Spousal support was added due to the extent of his misconduct and the deliberate steps he took to hide his intentions. Cormac sat silent as the judgment was read, no longer able to shape the narrative or redirect blame. Everything he had tried to protect for himself slipped out of his hands. I didn't celebrate. I didn't speak to him. I simply listened, letting the court's decision close a chapter he had torn apart long before I heard those voices upstairs. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a quiet strength settle inside me, an understanding that the truth, once brought into the open, had finally done what it needed to do. Cormac's world crumbled quickly. Key clients pulled their contracts, projects stalled, and his firm hemorrhaged credibility. Rilla vanished the moment the flow of money stopped, leaving him exposed and frantic. Quietly, I sent detailed evidence of hidden expenses to the company's board, triggering investigations that unraveled his entire web of scheme. As his empire faltered, I purchased the small investment property he had ridiculed, signing the papers with calm satisfaction. For the first time, I felt the full weight of control back in my hand. Months passed, and the house finally felt like mine. Every corner reflected decisions I had made, not ones imposed on me. I wasn't just free from Cormac's lies. I was free from the years of subtle control and hidden agendas he had built around me. The quiet rooms, once heavy with tension, now held a calm that reminded me who I was. I started traveling again, exploring places I had put off, rediscovering passions that had been dormant. Work became more than routine. It became a way to reclaim confidence and purpose. Slowly, I pieced myself back together, layer by layer, without needing anyone's approval or interference. Some mornings I would sit by the window, coffee in hand, looking out at the garden I had chosen, the art I had hung, the life I had rebuilt. I realized that the betrayal had forced clarity, that the shock of loss had given me strength I hadn't known existed. And in those quiet moments, I would smile to myself, remembering that forgotten passport, the small mistake that had led me to the truth. It wasn't just a piece of travel documentation. It had been the spark that changed everything. Forgetting my passport didn't ruin my trip. It saved my life. Do you think I did the right thing by taking back control and leaving him, or should I have tried to forgive him? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Subscribe and hit the bell for more stories like this.